Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's definitely a pleasure to have you here today. My name is Nuha Shakir. I'm the Secretary General of the Egyptian FinTech Association and the Vice President of the Africa FinTech Network, which is the African Union for FinTech Associations. Both are non-for-profits that mainly work on building the FinTech ecosystem in Egypt and around 34 African markets to serve objectives and purposes like having a more inclusive financial industry, a more sustainable financial industry. And aside from that, I'm also an investment banker. I run impact funds as part of Gobi Partners, and I also advise the UK aid on their digital innovation projects around Africa through their one of the development arms, FSD Africa. So that's more or less what I do, and I'm definitely pleased and honored to be running the summit today. And I have some of the brightest, if not the brightest, of all from the investment scene in Egypt. And honestly, to do them right, I'm going to ask them to present themselves. I'm not going to do that myself. And of course, ladies first. And Sarah, please.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I work for a venture capital firm.
You're good? I can hear you, right?
Sure. I work for a venture capital firm that's based in Dubai, and I'm the Egypt office. So we have like a 20% allocation going towards fintech companies in Egypt. And we have a $50 million fund, and we currently are raising our second fund, which is a $100 million fund, and 20 million is going towards Egypt specifically for fintech and fintech enablers. And we have a climate fund also focused on Africa focused fund.
Hi, my name is Doha Al-Ghazali. I am the Managing Director for the Egypt office for Mediterranean Capital Partners. We are a private equity firm that invests in North and West Africa with offices in Casablanca, Malta, Cairo, and Ivory Coast, Barcelona. And we're focusing on mid-cap companies in the fund that we're investing off of now. And previously, we've been investing in SMEs in Egypt and in other countries in Africa as well.
Hi, this is Sharif Abdelal. I'm working for Camco Invest. I'm head of country in Egypt and head of mergers and acquisitions for the region. Our head office is in Kuwait. We have offices in the IFC, Egypt, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. We are investment banking asset management company. We have assets under management like $15 billion. And we are active in the region. And I'm board member on several companies in Egypt as well.
Hello, my name is Tariq Muharram. I'm part of Elevate Capital Group. Elevate has incorporated the first operator healthcare fund of Africa that bases its operation for Egypt, also for Morocco, Kenya, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire. We focus on 4 areas of healthcare: specialized hospitals in the area of cancer, cardiology, but also outpatient diagnostic services, insurance and medical insurtech, and finally primary healthcare clinics. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Well, this session is meant to be and designed as an interactive session. So your questions are more than welcome. We are going to make sure that we attend to the questions, identifying the areas of opportunity where you can actually invest. Happy to attend to whatever concerns that you may have that we can also elaborate on and clear. To start, Egypt is one of the most attractive markets for investment, naturally, because of the size of the market, because of the access to relatively cheaper, capable workforce, because of how rich it is in natural resources that supports the growth and accelerated growth actually in certain industries, especially the sustainable ones like clean energy and the like. So to start and set the context, I'm going to actually ask Sherif to give us a bit of an overview of the overall climate in the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it's working. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for your presence. I think that in general, Egypt is one of the optimal countries for investment in North Africa due to the population size and the growth in the economy and in different sectors. However, of course, there is some challenges we can see always, which is natural, and most of the investors can deal with and handle easily if they choose correctly the ecosystem of the advisors they use for the transaction, and if they studied well their pillars for the investment. Of course, dragging after negative information or false information, this is the worst thing to, or a trap to fall in. Of course, we are witnessing now some challenges on different fronts, and the best thing is to confront it. The major challenge is the FX rate, or the exchange rate, which clearly is impacted due to the pressure on the currency. And moreover, after the pandemic and after the war between Russia and Ukraine, all of this are pressuring the currency, and the overall currency changes in the world. We can see it clearly now. However, still there is a huge growth rates, and the population is supporting such growth, which we can say it's an evergreen growth on all fronts, on consumer, on financial sectors, on every thing which is supporting the system. We are witnessing a very strong wave of mergers and acquisitions and transactions in the country, especially now from the financial investors and financial players. We can see that strategics globally are a bit dormant. However, their turn will come within a couple of years, because now the financial investors are preparing the platform for the next wave for strategics by growing and consolidating some sectors. We can see that sovereign funds started to invest directly and indirectly in Egypt. In specific, we can see the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund and the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund are investing directly and indirectly. We can say that both of them have invested till now like $8 billion in Egypt. And a lot of other private equity players are doing perfectly in Egypt. Of course, there's a lot of details. I don't want to consume the time covering much of details. However, I think on the other questions, I can go deep or further. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sherif. Well, it's always best to attend to the elephant is in the room, as they say, and I'm really glad that you put those challenges there up front when we first started. Despite those challenges, we have seen growth rates across the key industries in the economy, the healthcare, the financial sector, the agri sector, transportation, of course, real estate that we are going to be attending to shortly as the discussion goes ahead. Aside from the sovereign funds that have found and decided to be key players in Egypt with major investments. The BII, the British investment, has actually put Egypt amongst its 8 focus markets to invest in around Africa, whether on the equity side or the debt, sovereign debt mostly, or senior debt side. So that is a clear, definitely sign that there is a lot of action in there.
They have a rep office in Egypt as
Yeah,
well.
definitely, yes. They have a rep office in Egypt as well. Well, since we are bankers slash investment bankers or techies in here, so it makes perfect sense to touch base and cover the financial industry and the fintech first. And perhaps, Sarah, you can give us an overview about the fintech industry in Egypt, the growth it has witnessed, the achievements that were achieved over the past 2 years, please.
So it's no surprise that financial inclusion is one of the most the top priorities in Egypt for the government. So the FRA and the central bank and all the entities have been working towards finding different ways to increase the access and to increase the number of people with bank accounts, since it's 30% of the population has a bank account, and of those 30%, 4% have credit cards. And in the last 2 years, they've noticed that the best way to get to the consumer is through fintech companies. So they've been collaborating with companies like Lucky or Trella or all the startups that have access directly to consumers, have it be it through businesses or microloans or lending or payments, like just different ways to increase the number of people with debit cards, the Misa cards, which are like prepaid debit cards, like making it easier to onboard these consumers, and then offering them the type of products that are more relatable to them. For example, like the Vodafone wallets, which are 85% of the wallets in Egypt are through Vodafone. Yeah, what was the question?
Why do you think the fintech industry in Egypt has potential?
Yeah.
You've already covered that. Well, okay. So the rate of financial inclusion in the country represents a huge opportunity, whether we are talking banking, financial services, or non-banking financial services, insurance, leasing, factoring. There is a lending gap on the ground that opens doors as well to opportunities for fintechs with focus on SME lending, on equity investment, also with an SME focus. The payment companies, we have plenty of those. We, however, see opportunity in payments. If we are talking cross-border payments, remittances, mainly, that's also a key opportunity that we see in the fintech sector in Egypt. And we're happy, of course, to get questions related to that and attending to it further on. Noha, would you like to add a little bit on the fintech industry before we move?
Thank you. I think, as Sarah was saying, it's a sector that represents the ultimate growth in Egypt because of the under-penetration that we have. You have a very large population, mostly young people, that almost are unbanked. So actually in the younger ages in Egypt, the unbanked percentage is even more, which is kind of the opposite of how it should be. So it is a sector that is pretty virgin when it comes to ideas, when it comes to technology playing a role there. We've seen some of the sectors even faster than the development of the legislation, and the legislation actually came after. So for example, consumer finance has been there in the market for decades now, and then after the technology came in and the scalability was there and the access to larger divisions of the population was already on the market, the legislation came later, and that opened even more space for newer companies to come in. We've seen companies like microfinance that have unlocked a lot of potential because of the technology angle to it and being able to reach bigger portions of the population. We've seen something, for example, in Egypt that was very supportive from a legislation perspective, which is the FinTech law that was issued earlier this year. For the first time, we started seeing terminologies like digital records and digital identities in Egyptian laws. So this enables even more expansion into different products. We are seeing P2P services that are being launched in the country, supported by companies that are either private sector or held by Egyptian commercial banks. So the potential for the fintech space in Egypt is virtually unlimited from the microfinance side or from the corporate side, and also from the consumption side and the consumer finance side, where most of the products in Egypt for people to use, for example, on the savings side, it's very conventional. So having digital saving solutions are something that are being innovated in the market now. So pretty much the sector is untapped, and there's so much need for innovative products. There's so much need for scalable products. And this is where all the opportunities come from.
Thank you very much as well for highlighting the regulatory reform part. So aside from the fintech regulation that was issued by the central bank, we also had a non-banking fintech regulation that was issued by the Financial Regulatory Authority that also supports the growth of sectors like insurtechs, digital consumer finance, and the like. And actually, over the past 5-6 years, the number of regulations that were enacted by the regulators and the Egyptian government to drive and accelerate growth in sectors where there is potential. One of them, of course, is the financial industry, but we see regulations for the SME as well, facilitating the growth of the sector. You see the data protection laws now in the pipeline. We have a digital signature law that is going to also drive the growth in digital service provisioning in general, whether it is going to be financial or non-financial. So the regulatory reform, having the right supportive policies on the ground is one of the reasons and one of the key drivers of direct foreign investment into the country. The government being responsive to the market. I mean, Noha has actually given an example about the consumer finance sub-industry, like where we saw traction on the ground and then the law actually followed. That is a clear indicator that the government is giving innovation its time to actually happen on the ground, is giving the chance to the market to take the lead, and then they would follow to make sure that, of course, any systemic risks that are there are covered, that the consumer protection is in place, and the like. So that was a very clear example on the direction that the Egyptian government is currently taken. And now that we still are with it, would you like to comment? No? Okay. Now that Noha still has the mic, we had a discussion in the morning that we are not going to be covering one of the industries, which is the real estate, due to a personal belief that it's growing well enough on its own. But Noha has raised a couple of aspects in there related to technology use cases and applications that we should be highlighting, to be honest. So please.
No, we were just saying in the morning that real estate has been always one of the very preferred investment products for a lot of Egyptians historically and culturally. And given the massive urban development, I'm not sure if most of the audience are familiar with Egypt or not. However, Cairo now spans diameter of probably 150, 160 kilometers. So it's a mega city. It's a major city with a lot of urban development that's happening in Cairo, that's happening in the new administrative capital, that's happening in other governorates as well, on the coasts, whether the Mediterranean or the Red Sea. So there's a lot of development that's happening on the real estate side. And this is giving a lot of people the potential to invest. However, a lot of innovative ideas are also coming in when it comes to prop tech. So we're having platforms for exchanging shares in real estate assets, or having commercial real estate assets that are being owned by platforms, and then giving a certain yield to different investors, or having actually real estate funds being part of the discussion in the Egyptian market now. So there's a lot of development in that space as well, to kind of mainstream the investment and to make it less geared towards individual ownership, but rather than a proper investment product. So it's also, again, a part of the overall development in the Egyptian culture when it comes to investment. It's diversifying into real estate, it's diversifying into even the stock market. There's a lot of involvement when it comes to the youth now, and there's a lot of startups that are providing access to retail individuals to invest in the stock market as well. So it's an overall, all what we're saying, I think it's an overall sign of how the Egyptian market is evolving into a more educated, more geared towards proper investment mentality, whether on the government side, on the cultural side, on even on the asset side. And I think we're going to definitely touch upon different sectors and how they're evolving when it comes from an investment perspective.
Thank you very much for that. And again, since you've mentioned the stock market, we cannot not mention the ESG focus, the SDG focus, the green investments that have already started to flow into the country that represents a huge investment opportunity. So we have seen the biggest solar field in Upper Egypt, Benban, and then we saw the green hydrogen project in the Suez Canal zone. And there is another key green tech industrial zone that is being developed as part of the Suez Canal economic zone, that of course comes with packages and bundles of support that has been put together and carefully designed by the government to make that particular area, the Suez Canal axis, even more attractive to investors beyond its strategic location and it's being positioned there, how that drives the shipping costs, the logistical cost down as well. So thank you for raising that. The head of the stock market has just issued a directive that to all the companies that are enlisted in the Egyptian stock market have to report on their ESG aspects. And currently we have a couple of 2 or 3 green funds that are being developed in the country. I am in charge of one of them, which is an SME green transition fund that works with SMEs who are actually either doing business as usual, who want to transition to green, will fund them, or the green ones who wish to expand regionally and grow their operations as well, so they can have a chance to be funded. We also should highlight the role of DFIs and the role of blended finance as an effective tool to de-risk investments in the green area. If any of the gentlemen wishes to elaborate a bit on that, please go ahead.
Sure. So like Noha was saying, we have seen a lot of focus coming from Egyptian entrepreneurs in the direction of ESG and in the direction of proper governance as well. And this is part of the maturity that our entrepreneurial ecosystem is going through. And for example, our family of investments are all have an overarching ESG strategy that is based around the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 3 strategy or principles of the WHO. And we've set very rigid governance, us and many of the investment managers that we work around, just to assure the investors that their money will be employed within proper and optimal governance structures. And we think that this is very important. And again, it's very. I think it's crucial to mention that Egypt and some other countries are going through challenges, like Sharif was saying, But those challenges are nothing new for an investor interested in Africa. We will face some pressures here and there every 2, 3, 4 years, but at the end of the day, the fundamentals are what matters. And many portfolio companies that we manage and that my colleagues here manage have achieved growth rates of 30, 35, 40% CAGR that achieve very proper profitabilities. And those
No. Perhaps you should go into details and tell us about your portfolio that has achieved the 40%.
Yes,
Yeah, please.
An important portfolio company that we've managing for the last few years, 7 years to be exact, have a CAGR of 35%. And then Egypt went through a major devaluation of its currency back in 2016. And we were able to recoup our margin, our EBITDA margin of 32% within less than 12 to 14 months. So any proper investment management team and corporate management team that works in our part of the world in emerging markets and in frontier is very well equipped and very well trained to deal with these kinds of challenge that Noha and Sharif highlighted at the beginning of this. And maybe also, I have to be honest, maybe I'm working so Noha called fintech the ultimate growth sector.
On healthcare.
Healthcare is the ultimate defensive sector. So maybe we're lucky in that regard as well. But again, even political turmoil, which we are not going through anymore after 10 years of instability, it did not hit our business the way it would investors would imagine. Even many of the opportunities, not the challenge that we are looking at. We're talking about universal health coverage now within 10 years. This is a tremendous opportunity. It opens tons of opportunities for hospitals, for insurance, for primary health care, because Egypt has been lacking in the area of primary health care. So there are plenty of opportunities that are highly investable, highly bankable, also significant in size, because there was a big complaint about not finding enough investment-friendly opportunities, but we believe we have many of that. One last mention I need to do is that our gap in hospital beds in Egypt and in the whole of Africa, but I'm going to focus on Egypt, means that if we all build, if we give our 100% to build hospitals from here and for 50 years, we'll not cover that gap. So we not only try to cover that gap now, but we try to do it at a certain standard and at a certain level of quality and of sustainability and of governance that my colleagues inspire a lot when I think about it. Thank you so much.
Well, definitely the healthcare industry represents one of the biggest investment opportunities in the country. And again, one of the growth drivers in that sector is the fact that the Egyptian government has already attempted to work on a universal healthcare program, and they are also open and supportive to public-private partnerships when it comes to managing that particular sector to close certain performance gaps on the ground. So definitely that is a huge opportunity. And we cannot mention healthcare without touching base on health tech, whether that health tech is on the side of insurance and insurtech or on the remote healthcare provisioning. That, of course, in large markets like Egypt and other parts of Africa has great and huge potential for growth. If anybody wants to touch base on that and elaborate.
Insurtech under fintech. We see insurtech as something that would fall under fintech as a fintech enabler, because when you're providing access, like through AXA or any of these insurance companies, like a big part of their business is financials, or the underwriting, the actuary, like everything that they're doing is financial inclusion, and having insurance is part of, yes, healthcare, but also financial inclusion. But I know you'll always argue against fintech.
No, not at all, not at all. I'm a big believer in fintech. I'm a big believer in inclusion, and actually, I think we're going in the same direction, because insurance itself, private medical insurance penetration in Egypt is around 3%. In Africa, it's even less than that, which is a huge opportunity. And we believe that conventional insurance products have not succeeded in penetrating Africa for the last 1 or 2 decades. So for us, one of our structure is a structure that actually incubates some of the startups in the area of health tech, in the area of consumer finance for health services, in the area of medical insurtech, which many insurance companies shy away from because it is a little bit more complicated, I think. And it's a corporate VC structure built around a third-party administration of medical insurance services. And we hope that by collaborating, we will be able to increase the penetration for medical insurance, which will really change the whole infrastructure of healthcare, because the idea of monetization and how patients are able to afford some of the most complex medical procedure is a major challenge that if we start to face with courage and with intelligence, we can do a lot, I believe.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tarek. What other opportunities you see in the Egyptian market that you wish to highlight to us?
Again, to build on what Tarek and Noha and all of the colleagues have mentioned, that there is a huge gap always in the markets in Egypt, and this creates opportunity for investors who come in or tap in with good know-how and properly to make growth. We can see that most of the sector's normal or usual year-on-year growth is like 30% on average. Others are let's say from 20 to 30% in general, and we can see that the GDP growth this year is hovering around 4.4%. Most of the sectors are underpenetrated from the financial angle, and any work that is done properly on this angle serves a lot this sector and helps to accelerate the growth in such sector. You can see that all of the sectors, like the healthcare we're talking about, a lot of applications penetrated the sector, starting from the insurance to the pharmaceutical side, to the healthcare side and the hospitality side. All of this are serving, and from the angle of the financial. So it's all about the financial inclusion, and if we can see that in Egypt it's under-penetrated from the women and children on the financial side. The bank accounts, most of the 18 or 20 as age is not enjoying any bank accounts unless they started to work. 21, 22, they start their bank accounts. So there is a huge gap which can be easily served and serve the inclusion. All of the non-banking financial sector is extremely booming in Egypt, especially leasing, factoring, mortgage, microfinance, and consumer finance as well. The healthcare, the pharma, anything related to food is extremely growing very well and is making a double-digit per year. And we can see that the margins, the profitability margins are double digits always in Egypt. That's in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. So we opened 2 areas of discussion in here. The first one is definitely the food industry, whether it's agriculture or processing in general. So please feel free to elaborate on that. The second most important industry, which is an accelerator to economic growth, is the education industry, where there is a huge opportunity for investments on the ground as well, whether it's traditional education or edtech platforms and technology-based solutions that are there. Who wishes to attend to what? Not you? Okay.
Let me just tackle upon these points a little bit. So, as we were saying, and I want to take the discussion a little bit into the depth of the private sector in Egypt and why these kind of companies, and especially whether in the food or the education sector, that have been very much they've been there with private sector held companies for a very long time. We have companies that have been operating in the Egyptian market for decades. And I want to touch upon the fact that these kind of companies now, and especially for private sector held companies, they are now migrating from the first or the second generation into the second and third generation of shareholders or of the family. And at that point, because of everything that everyone was saying, which is how the fundamentals of the Egyptian market is very strong and how there have been very healthy growth rates and very good profitability margins for the past years, most of these companies have been very focused on a strategy that was opportunistic or reactive for the development of the market itself. And they have been very local focused. So most of the companies in Egypt, you will find them selling in the Egyptian market and catering only to the Egyptian market. And this represents a very strong opportunity from an investment perspective, especially for financial investors, because they are now at that inflection point where a financial investor going in and adding more governance and adding proper structuring and adding a strategy that is more scientific or proactive rather than reactive to a market, or giving access to finance that would enable acquisitions or expansions or diversifications or penetration of different markets. There's a very natural extension of the Egyptian market, whether into Africa or into other countries, because of course of the geographical location. You can be more export-oriented into Europe, you can go into Africa, you can go into the GCC. So there's a lot of opportunity for thinking beyond the local market. And we've seen this happen, for example, in the food and beverage sector, where some of these companies have become more export-oriented and they have expanded with acquisitions beyond the Egyptian market when private equity players have gone into their cap table. So I just want to deviate a little bit from the tech angle into the traditional businesses, because these kinds of family businesses are the ones that someone like us, for example, in MCP, these are our typical partners that we would want to go in and take them from the capacity of a family for growth and the capacity of one single market for growth into the capacity of diversification or the capacity of taking it beyond the limited local angle. So this is one of the things that we focus on as well. And I also want to touch upon one thing, which is the idea of the small and medium enterprises in Egypt, because these are the real engine behind the economic growth that Sherif and the rest of the panel were talking about. These represent over 95% of the Egyptian companies. And for a market with the fundamentals of Egypt, we need to see much larger number of companies that are into the large cap. And this will only happen, as my fellow colleagues were saying, with foreign direct investment, whether from sovereign funds or from private equity players or from other financial institutions, because they are the kind of company, these are the kind of investments that prep these companies for ultimately being acquired by large strategic players, or them being one of the largest strategic players actually on a global side. So I just wanted to touch on the small and medium strategy as well.
Thank you very much for raising that. Well, there is definitely an opportunity in there in that particular sector, whether it's equity, debt, or mezzanine. And thank you very much for highlighting that. Please go ahead.
Yes, I commend Noha for her last intervention, because she touched on a few points that I would like to further elaborate on. there are companies in Egypt that are real diamonds in the rough. I believe that really the opportunities is the typical cliche of an iceberg, where 10% is outside the water, but 90% is below water. And when one of the investment managers has a real proprietary reach into the market, they get access to the family businesses know-how was talking about, but also to many other structures that are there. And these companies has been also inverted towards the Egyptian market, because it's a market of 120 million population. So it's hard to get done with a market like this, right? But absolutely, these companies are a perfect potential for platforms that can expand regionally. And the reason for that, besides the geography, etc., is our human caliber. We are a very rich society in terms of human calibers. Some of the major companies in the world in the areas of designs and PMP have their back offices in Egypt. For example, Al-Sha'ar Group or Dar al-Handasa. Some of the big healthcare company has their command centers of doctors that does the teleradiology, the tele-ICU, etc., are based in Egypt. And moving these platforms into sub-Saharan countries and other North African countries is a definitive opportunity for growth, for something that is more pan-African, or at least more regional when it comes to Africa. And that brings us to the idea of education, because the idea, or for me, it would be the more general concept of capacity building. I think that capacity building is both an ESG target and a business opportunity at the same time. And the capacity building when it comes to training, when it comes to education, is critical for the development of our economy, for the future of our companies, and a lot of the people we work with are very well aware of that. We tend to be more focused on shorter programs that can deliver bigger impact on the quality of the human caliber in a shorter time. And we're bringing affiliations from all over the world to teach our managers, but also our technocrats, everything they need to be taught in this rapidly evolving and highly competitive world we live in. But actually, I think our companies in Egypt are doing well in this regard, and it is something that can be a major game changer for the whole of the African development, I believe.
Thank you very much for that. And we've already started seeing some international foreign universities establishing chapters in Egypt in partnership with local companies that have decided to explore the educational scene. The latest, I believe, was Nova University, a technical university out of Portugal that just established a base in Egypt in partnership with the Swedi education. Here I'll have to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the input, and I'm going to open the floor for some questions before we actually wrap up our session for today. Happy to answer questions. Yes, please.
Hello. Yeah, so one of the primary drivers for fintech has been the growth of the payments ecosystem, both in Africa, and I come from India there as well, where UPI set up, and then other sort of credit and other sort of financial products started flowing in. The question is, what's the current readiness of the payments infrastructure in Egypt?
Oh, thank you very much for asking that, because again, that's one source of pride in here, the amount of work that has gone into our payments infrastructure over the past 5-6 years, whether on the regulatory reforms where we put regulations covering agent banking, covering digital wallets, and then the interoperability regulation, as well as infrastructure, and then the instant payment that is there. If you look at the 140 plus fintechs that are operating in Egypt, more than 50% of those are actually payment service providers. So that's a clear reflection of the stage of maturity that we've actually reached as far as payment infrastructure is concerned, and the level of readiness that we are currently at. And you see a lot of international players as well entering the market, aiming at having a piece of the cake. Again, payment. The payment industry represents the first step and stage when offering other financial services. So you start with payment to build that track record of transactions where you can actually do credit assessment later on based on that flow of money and transactions that there is. So we understood that really early on, and that was the first sub-industry that the government and the regulators have focused on, of course supported by banks as well as telecommunications companies, who've also played a very effective role in expanding the reach and penetration of digital wallets that serves the bottom of the pyramid and the average household. So even the ones who do not have access to banks and bank accounts, they already have access to digital wallets that come at almost no cost, and they're very much accessible. I hope that has answered your question. If anybody wishes to elaborate, please. Yeah, no? Okay.
I guess one of our biggest unicorns or success stories in Egypt is Fawri. It's the original fintech company and one of the first to IPO. And then a lot of our success stories are Paymo, which is also a payment company. And then even from the government side, they created InstaPay, which is the first closed-loop testing environment for money transfers, have it be bank-to-bank or through the wallets, as a start for them to open it up on a bigger scale, which is something that already exists globally, like Venmo or Zelle, or so many countries already have this, and to have the government initiate it as a way to test it and then open it up to all the other international banks is a very big step forward and shows how much we're working on financial inclusion in Egypt.
Thank you, Sarah. No? Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Laone Bukamuhulela from Botswana. I worked at Africa 50, and one of our big projects in Egypt was in the Ben region, a solar park, which is one of the biggest solar parks in the world. We have a 450 megawatt solar power plant there. And so I didn't hear any of the commentators here talking about infrastructure investment opportunities in Egypt. What are they apart from solar, of course? But what do you see as the infrastructure investment opportunities in the country? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much again for asking the question. We took it was a consensus that we are not going to be touching base on infrastructure projects. The reason why is because they are very well promoted and they are, I mean, the government actually takes the responsibility of doing that, and they're doing a great job. This is why, that's the main reason why we decided we're not tackling that, but we're happy to elaborate if Sherif can cover that, please.
As you mentioned, Noha, it's very well taken care of, and it's obvious and very clear that there is a huge investments in the infrastructure over the past or last 3 to 4 years at least, in a mega and giga even projects in a lot of new cities and connecting cities together with different ways and roads, and there is a huge concentration on the electricity. Now there is no electricity problems or power problems in Egypt as previously, like 6 years ago there was a lot of cutoffs and problems. Now it is not. So yes, there is a huge concentration from the government and the head of the government directly to all of the infrastructure and related infrastructure projects, including the solar energy, and there is a huge support for such projects to be operated, and I think you can see a lot of facilities from the government on that front, and they take it seriously with any investor who wants to invest in such projects.
Yeah, and multiple investors are there, whether they're DFIs, whether they're sovereign funds, governments, and the like, in the area of transportation, in the area of telecommunications infrastructure, in real estate, as we've mentioned and spoken. Of course, clean and renewable energy as well has been one of the biggest sectors receiving majority of the investments, and you see almost all the international players in that field present in the country. Please start.
Yes, so just one more infrastructural direction that I think needs to be mentioned is water. There's a lot of projects, there's a big strategy around water desalination, and around also optimal eco-friendly use of water in order to make sure that our water supplies continue to maintain for our big population. And I believe that there's tremendous opportunities in that as well. And once we talk about water, it then gets into agriculture. And the idea of agricultural capability expansion is a very important one. And after we felt on a more global level that this interconnection between the world when it comes to agriculture might be the solution for all of us, the global events, the Ukrainian-Russian war, has showed us that we can get in shortage even at the level of wheat, at the level of bread in our countries. So there's a new focus after the idea of water on land agriculture capability buildings. And these are areas that I strongly encourage you to keep an eye on and to know more about, because I think they're very, very interesting as well.
I think also one of the major items when it comes to infrastructure investments is the inland transportation program that the government is currently undergoing. We're talking about a plan for the transportation ministry to invest somewhere around £1 trillion Egyptian pounds over the coming few years, which is not just catering to new roads or urban development, but it's also very much focused on the idea of inland transportation of cargoes, whether it's a railway network system or it is connecting the Red Sea with the Mediterranean Sea across different ports through inland transportation. There's definitely the different concessions for different ports that are being issued by the government. Of course, the Suez Canal economic zone that everyone is talking about. So I think when it comes to infrastructure, as Noah was saying, it's a very obvious area for investment. Maybe it doesn't even need that we promote for it, because the opportunity is there, whether it's inland, whether it's in the ports, whether it's in the water, whether it's in agriculture reclamation. So definitely you should look across all of these opportunities.
And it's worth highlighting that those investments are all sustainable, environmentally friendly investments. So you see like electric trains and the like. So we're not just building, we are building for a growth trajectory that does not have a negative impact on the environment. Thank you very much. Questions? We only have 5 minutes left, so 2 questions to go. None?
Thank you. Elif Erkul from TCX. We provide currency hedging, so my question will be regarding that. FX was mentioned a couple of times, as well as the DFIs, so offshore lenders. Do you see any demand from both DFIs and also the investees in Egypt for local currency funding? And are there any de-dollarization strategies imposed by the government as well? So I was just curious also in which sectors you see more demand and local currency coming in. Thank you.
طيب, answering your question, yes, there is in general for FDIs and investors from abroad, there is a repatriation system which supports their money in and out through the Central Bank of Egypt. So they should penetrate the Egyptian market through the Central Bank of Egypt. That's clear, and it's been activated, we can say, like 4 years ago, and it is re-supported by the existing and the new CBE head to make sure and give the comfort for all of the foreign direct investors and any kind of investor entering Egypt. So there's no problem at all with this, and a lot of them are taking back their cash proceeds or exit proceeds from their investments through a queue. However, it's clear, and they have their funds outside of Egypt. And to tell you from the pragmatic side, there's no problem because, as I mentioned, you can see that sovereign funds are investing directly and indirectly in Egypt. Even EBRD are investing now in Egypt, and the previously CDC and all of the investors. So there's no problem. I don't know if I have answered your question or not. And the growth, sorry for that, and the growth rates again recover and cover perfectly any devaluation and inflation in the country. And you can see that the most recent transaction announced, which is for DPI, it's the fund here based in London, and replaced by the sovereign fund of Saudi Arabia. You can see the dynamics and the dramatic growth they have made. They invested early 2016 while it was 5.7 the exchange rate, and now the exit is like 19 point something. You can see the dollar base itself. It's tremendous, like 4 times at least. Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to compliment that I was yesterday in a summit for another African country where the minister was proud that his company has repatriated $25 billion. Our market has, during the global crisis, there was $17 billion that exited Egypt. So that really shows that our regulatory environment has decided to become extremely flexible when it comes to inflows and outflows of capital, and that's a very critical milestone in the development, in the intellectual development of our economic decision makers. I also want to tell you that the FX pressures that are happening are also very well accounted for, budgeted for, planned for. You would see that most of the executives working in our country have a discount rate, that provision that they keep dragging along with them for a day like this one, for a crisis like this one. So actually, when you compare where we are today in this regard from 5 or 6 years ago, it's another thing to be proud of.
Thank you very much for highlighting that. And that, of course, reflects the level of the resilience of the financial industry as well as the governance of the sector. So that is about the last question for today. Thank you very much for being here with us. And of course, we are around if you wish to ask any questions. We'd be happy to engage on one-on-one. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much, dear panelists, for being here. Thank you.